Addiction is a disorder. The term disease typically implies something physical, but our mental health community has adopted the word disorder for afflictions of the mind, mood, personality, character, or emotions. We will use the term disorder going forward. Like OCD, bipolar, and other personality disorders, addicts suffer from an addictive disorder, AD. Some are addicted to something specific like heroin, and some have a more chronic version of it known as addictive personality disorder, APD, which encompasses a large spectrum of desire objects and is not sustained by a specific object or desire itself. Instead, it is sustained by a more innate defect of the mind, the need to compensate for deficient emotions or neurochemicals within the mind-brain. Addiction is a progressive disorder. Addiction begins at the recreational stage and progresses to the advanced stages sequentially. It is not a certainty that every recreational user will advance to full addiction. In modern society, addiction is probably the most prolific disorder in the world, outnumbering every other disorder by leaps and bounds, with drug epidemics taking place in every civilized city and town in the world. A boogeyman scare belief is that everyone and anyone who does drugs can and likely will become an addict. Just not so. Not anyone and everyone who goes out on a sunny day will get a severe sunburn. Genetics, constitution, and a myriad of other factors have to come to bear. We will be thoroughly exploring those factors that make someone vulnerable to addiction, less vulnerable, and even invulnerable. The DSM-4 diagnoses addiction as: the individual must have 3 of the following at any time in the same 12-month period. 1. Tolerance, a need for markedly increased amounts to achieve the same effect. Need more dope for the same high. 2. Withdrawal, painful and adverse conditions directly related to the absence of using it. DSM does not specify if these symptoms are physical or psychological, such as bad mood, depressed, cramps, etc. 3. Using more and more often than intended. I'm only going to have 2 drinks on the weekends and go home at 11 turns into 14 drinks several times per week and home at dawn. 4. Persistent desire or unsuccessful attempts to quit or use less. 5. A great deal of time is spent on activities to obtain, use, or recover from using, i.e., for example, obtain. Time and energy spent scamming money to score, drove for 1 hour to wait 2 hours for a dealer who took forever to show up. And B. Use. Work feverishly to repair a pipe, a syringe, or other paraphernalia. And recover. Lying in bed all the next day, feeling trash from using. 6. Using displaces other interests by some degree. I used to play video games, now I do dope. 7. Continued use despite the awareness that using contributes to a physical or psychological problem. Using cocaine even though one has a deviated septum from using cocaine. Addiction is a compulsion, a pathology. The idea that it is a choice is insultingly oversimplified and a convenient perspective for non-addicts to persist in. An OCD person does not feel they have a choice in their compulsive behaviors, as sections of their brain or neurons are responsible for creating a desire to perform a behavior that is not subject to reason, intellect, or sense. This is why we call it a compulsion and not a decision. Neither does a schizophrenic choose to be delusional. A pathology is not a choice. Addiction is behavioral. The DOC, drug of choice, can be a substance like alcohol or an action like gambling. The term DOC will be used generically to refer to any addictive focal point. There's no cure for pathological disorders, and addictive disorder is no different. Anyone who tells you addiction can be cured is likely a flat-out liar trying to sell something they cannot deliver or optimistically ignorant. Addiction disorder is dormant in childhood, much like OCD and other personality disorders, and becomes active or symptomatic in adolescence and/or when drugs are introduced to the individual. I was an addict before I ever did drugs, as the components of addiction within my brain-mind were present but dormant. Because of my addictive pathology, I was easily willing to say yes to dangerous drugs, even though I was intellectually aware of the dangers and risks. I was intelligent enough to know what was dangerous and rational enough to know I should avoid them. However, My addictive disordered brain overrode those safety mechanisms. There are those who will say no to drugs because they lack the addictive disorder brain, and those who say yes because they do have it. Once the DOC is introduced, addictive disorder thinking is awakened intensely and begins to manifest overwhelming reason and logic. A man who never used drugs even once until he was 35 became a full-blown addict within a month. Due to circumstances, his dormant AD had not been activated until then. If I were to ask you to have lunch at a cannibal restaurant, you would say, "No, I hope. That's disgusting and sick. I would never eat people." And I agree, it is disgusting. However, in the 1970s, a sports team crashed in the Andes Mountains, and in order to survive, they were faced with the decision to eat the flesh of the dead passengers who were teammates and friends, or to perish. Faced with survival situations, brain chemistry can literally alter itself, making the repulsive and seemingly impossible possible. The fight or flight mechanism activates in a survival situation, making us capable of doing things we would not otherwise be able to do. Drug craving addiction creates a similar paradigm and works with the same neurochemicals. The need for a DOC becomes so overwhelming that it actually activates the fight or flight mechanism, and an addict becomes capable of doing things to fulfill the need they normally object to and go against their personal principles. Many addicts in need of their DOC express a feeling of despair so profound that death is preferable to the urge to use being unfulfilled. If you were stuck in those mountains like those poor people about to die, you too would welcome a cannibalistic lunch. No, they didn't enjoy it, they were just capable of it. This is why it is so important not to judge addicts on a personal level for their dishonesty and immorality. They are overwhelmed and in many instances not accountable for their actions. One of the first issues families present to me as their counselor is the lack of trust for their addicted loved ones. I ask them if the lying, cheating, stealing, and deception is independent of their addiction, or are these behaviors always addiction related? So I ask them, are their lies always relatable to using? The answer has nearly always been yes. Their lying and stealing is associated and motivated by their drug need and using. It is not independent of it. Addiction does not go away as a result of abstinence. It can become manageable, and the addict can remain symptom-free for many years and even all their lives, but they never stop being an addict. With the introduction of the wrong circumstances, they could very well relapse at any time throughout their lives. If that occurs, they and their families must remain calm and work to reestablish abstinence and sobriety by reestablishing the strategies used to establish it the first time. This is covered in the treatment and recovery sections coming up.